Admiral, what a treat to have you on. I can't thank you enough. I told you before we went on, I've got two brothers, military guys, certainly not admirals. They're studs, but they're not you. But I want to dig into all things leadership and, of course, your latest book. But I sort of want to start here with what is a little bit of a broad question. But what separates, in your view, in your incredible depth of knowledge and experiences, a good leader from a great leader?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Well, first, great to be with you. I get asked the question pretty often, are great leaders born or are they made? And one of the things that I tell folks is, look, I think you can make a good leader. We do it in the military all the time. We teach them the fundamentals of leadership. But the great leaders, they have an X factor that I think they're born with. I think in today's vernacular, we would talk about their emotional quotient. They can walk into a room, they can sense the room. When they're talking to people, they know whether people are up or down and how to deal with it. And that's not really something you can teach. So I tend to think that, again, good leaders, and I've spent a lot of time with some very, very good leaders. And again, there are fundamentals you can teach them. But the great leaders, I do think there's an X factor that's kind of hard to put your finger on.
And so as you think about some of those things, and I sort of want to unpack it a little bit more, but your leadership philosophy, you've talked about, you've written lots of books, given lots of speeches, I know. How would you define your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, we have a term called servant leadership in the military. And when I came into the military, and I started my ROTC career in 1973, and I get commissioned in 1977. And it was a different military back then. The leaders in the military were kind of expected to be a little bit draconian in their approach. We'd call them toxic leaders today. They were just tough leaders. And you expected them to yell at you, and you expected them to push you hard. And sometimes that was fine. But what we found, particularly when we moved to an all-volunteer military, is, look, if a young officer came in or a senior enlisted, young enlisted kid, and all you did was scream at them, and you thinking that by putting them in this crucible it was going to make them better, they didn't stick around very long. So this idea of servant leadership, the idea that, look, your job as a leader is to make your team better. Your job is to give them the training, give them the resources, give them the latitude to do the job, and then hold them accountable when they don't do the job. And so, again, as a servant leader, if it's ever about you or your promotion, your greatness, then you're probably the wrong leader for the job. So I've tried to take this idea of servant leadership and apply it across my many years of leading.
And I would imagine your approach tactically has had to change as certainly the military, as you said earlier, and even in the corporate world has changed. To your point, sort of that command and control approach, how my dad raised us, right? It's a little different than the world today. How have you had to pivot and adjust your approach in service of helping get great outcomes out of the people that you lead, both be it the military or now?
Yeah, I think you might be surprised by the answer, but I don't think that your approach needs to change that much when you're a servant leader. Now, again, the leadership that I came into early on in my military career, that didn't define the rest of my leadership time. And so when I went from the military into higher education in the corporate world, you find that young men and women, millennials, Gen Z, whatever the newest generation is, they still want men and women that are their leaders to be people of character, to be people of integrity, to listen to them, to talk to them, to make the hard decisions, to hold them accountable, to hold themselves accountable. That leadership, those leadership qualities are transferable, I think, generation to generation and sector to sector, whether you're military or corporate or higher education or healthcare. It all seemed to work for me.
Mm-hmm. What's a leadership lesson that maybe took you a long time and maybe even some hard experiences to really understand, to really get, but has been and is what you would articulate now to be critical to be an effective leader?
Yeah, the hardest thing I think when you're first starting out as a young leader is to be good at listening. Now, I was fortunate in my first tour in the SEAL teams. I had an opportunity, and I was told by a lieutenant who was mentoring me at the time. He said, look, go talk to the command master chief. The command master chief was a senior enlisted guy at the SEAL team. He was also a Navy Cross recipient, which is the second highest award for valor. And I went and talked to him about, what does it take? I'm a young guy. I was not a Vietnam vet, but all of the guys that I'm leading are Vietnam vets. So how do you earn their respect? If you're a young officer coming in. And he said, look, you got to do 4 things. He said, first, you have to work hard. He said, you come in early, you work hard, you stay late, you come in on the weekends, you do whatever you have to do to make the platoon and the team better. You may not be the smartest, the fastest, the strongest SEAL out there, but if the guys see you working hard, they're going to respect you for it. The second thing he said was, learn the business of the business. Again, you're never going to be as good as the enlisted guys who specialize in this, but learn about skydiving and diving and demolition and weapons. Know your business. Third thing he said was, look, be a good teammate, because being a good teammate matters. The SEAL teams are a lot like a professional football team, probably more like a football team. We had about 12 or 14 guys in the platoon. You got a locker room, you got plays, you got playbooks, that sort of thing. And if you're a good teammate, if you're good in the locker room, if you pick the guys up when they struggle and dust them off and say, we're going to be okay, you're going to find that really goes a long way towards earning the respect of the people you're working with. But then the last thing he said, which I thought was very important, was he said, be a good person. That took me a little bit by surprise. He said, look, if you're a bad person, if you go out at night and do things that you regret, you drink too much, you do too many bad things, when you come into work the next day, you're going to bear the burden of those bad decisions, and that's going to weigh on you. And when that weighs on you, it's going to be harder for you to be concentrating on being the best officer you can. So those 4 things served me well. But the listening piece of this, to your first question, to your question about what was hard to learn, it was the listening part. It was kind of getting past, okay, I'm the officer, you're the enlisted, or I become more. Listen to the rank and file. They generally have the answers you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And that also, Admiral, would require that you ask great questions in service of having an opportunity to listen. Sure. What is your take on that, strategy on that? How do you think about that? I think curiosity is such a critical component of leadership too.
Yeah, it's a great point. And you do have to know how to ask great questions. But sometimes, my approach was to, you may ask questions that you know the answer to start with, to begin the dialogue. You don't have to ask them deep philosophical questions. You want to ask them questions to begin the conversation. And I always found that it's like anybody. You meet at a social setting, you start off, there's a little bit of small talk, you build, and then you get to the questions that have some real relevance. If you start right off asking them a $64,000 question, they may not have had time to think about it. They may not quite understand where you're coming from. But if you build a little rapport, build the questions up, and then kind of get to, okay, this is what I really need to know, then I think they're more inclined to answer it and you get a better answer out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about what you have done, it is staggering, candidly. And I would imagine there have been a lot of moments when you lose people under your command, and that's got to be incredibly difficult. How did you lead with strength, with that servant heart, if you will, when grief is a part of that? I would imagine for sure, but how did you get yourself and others through those moments when there was literally life lost and you're at the helm, needing them to sort of stay the course on mission?
Yeah, I think part of this is my Navy culture. And the first time it really happened to me in a way that was kind of directly impactful was I was on my way out for what later became Desert Shield and then Desert Storm. I was on board the USS Okinawa. We were steaming from San Diego out to the Philippines, and we lost 2 helicopters in a midair collision. And we searched for about 24 hours to try to find the guys, and we never did find them. They were lost at sea. And, the Navy, we grieved. We had a ceremony where the caskets, the flag draped caskets, even though there were no remains, were, ceremoniously and in a dignified manner, buried at sea. And then we moved on, and we had to keep moving. Mm-hmm. And at first, when it happened to me, I was like, wow, I don't know. I mean, we're spending, and maybe it was 48 hours, can't remember the exact time. I mean, we looked for these guys for a long time, but we also had a mission to do. We had to continue moving forward on our sailing path, and we were, again, heading out towards the Persian Gulf. And I remember at the time thinking that it was a little bit truncated. It didn't give me time to grieve, but the importance of it was, we were going to grieve for a certain period of time, and then we had to get on with the mission. Well, when 9/11 happens, that kind of culture helped me through these difficult times in that, yes, we lost soldiers almost every week. And we would have a ramp ceremony, we'd have a service for them, and then we would move on, because if you didn't, and if you didn't stay focused, then more soldiers were going to die the next night. So you had to understand that there was a grieving process, there was a respectful memorialization process, but then you had to get back to work. And my job was to make sure that people stayed focused on the mission so that we didn't lose more lives. And so you understand that as a leader in a time like this, it is truly your job to make sure that, again, you give the appropriate amount of time to grieve, but then you got to move on and keep people on track.
Mm-hmm. You led the mission to capture Saddam Hussein and the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, which is unbelievable. Thank you, sir. The stakes in that are so high. How did you prepare yourself, your team, for that in what clearly has obviously changed the course of our lives, so many lives, but inside of what was obviously a critical mission? And how did you prepare for that? And how did you prepare your guys?
Yes, a lot of this just has to do with experience. I mean, by the time, I'm in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'd been a Navy SEAL for, by 2003, for, 26, 27 years. By the time the bin Laden raid happens, 30 years. So I had seen a lot by that time. I had a lot of experience. And experience is important, certainly in a setting like that. And what you learn on all of these missions is, you have to plan. You got to do, for the bin Laden raid, we did extensive planning. We did extensive rehearsals and preparation because that things are going to go wrong. We have a saying in the military that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So things are going to go wrong. You have to think through the things that might happen and have plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D. So, when you see a helicopter go down, you say to yourself, well, that's bad, but you know what? In my case, I'd lost 7 helicopters in combat. So I knew what a helicopter crash looks like. I know what a helicopter hard landing looks like. I was listening on the headphones when the helicopter kind of careened off into the animal pen. I knew the guys were going to be okay, and you just keep moving, right? And you now orchestrate plan B. So, the important thing to remember as well is, it is the guys on the ground in both these cases, in the Saddam capture and the bin Laden raid. You trust the soldiers and the SEALs to do their job because they've been well trained. They understand the importance of the mission. And my job as a commander is to get them prepared for the mission and then let them go do it.
Absolutely. And be beside them to support them along the way, I can imagine. We think of these moments, as I said, from a historical perspective. But for you personally, Admiral, what did each of those moments feel like as a leader who carried the weight of the preparation, the process, the execution, the decision, all of it? And you're tough, man, no question about it. But can you get me inside of your head and heart a little bit on that? Because I would imagine that's it's a heavy weight to carry as a leader inside of missions like that.
Yeah, I don't want to make too much of it because on the bin Laden raid, once again, we did the planning, we did the rehearsals, and you understand, from your days of being coached, that at some point in time, the coach, there's not much more the coach can do. The coach has either trained you well and has trust and confidence in you, and then you have to go out and play the game. And the game's never going to go the way you plan. And as a coach, you have to be prepared to, call different plays. Same thing goes with the commander of a mission, right? So again, I knew that we had done everything we could, and now really it was in the hands of the guys, and I had to be prepared to make certain decisions certain times if things went south, which I was prepared to do. I was not overly, I didn't feel a lot of pressure. I can tell you, I give great credit to President Obama and Leon Panetta, who was director of the CIA. They had a lot of confidence in me, and I didn't feel pressure from anybody and from the White House on down, in terms of doing my job. That's very helpful. It's very helpful to know that, they're going to have your back if things go south, and I felt that they would. So I didn't really feel a lot of pressure on any of the big missions I've done. And kind of conversely, I'm not sure I ever felt great elation at the end of it. Yeah. Because what invariably happens on these sorts of things is, you come out of it and people are high-fiving at the end of it, whatever it happens to be, or they're excited. I'm not that guy. I'm not the guy that gets overly excited at the end of the mission, because there's always the after mission that comes. The press is going to ask you questions. The public is going to scrutinize things. Something invariably kind of goes south, and or you say something wrong in a press release. And next thing you know, that spirals out of control. So it's not just the mission; it's the post-mission follow-up. That if you get that wrong, then sometimes the mission doesn't look as glorious as it could have looked. So when the bin Laden mission was over, we had the bad guy, the good guys were back, they were safe. We still had to go bury bin Laden's body back out in the Gulf. And then I knew the next day I was going to have to travel back to Washington, D.C. I had to meet with all the congressional leaders, and you just never know how those things are going to go. I didn't really kind of wind down for probably a month or so after the mission, when I finally kind of took a breath and said, okay, looks like things have gone well. I can take a little bit of a breather. And again, I would offer that my experience over time has just told me, don't be getting too excited at the end of what you perceive as a win, because things can turn on you pretty quickly.
I want to talk a little bit about your newest, greatest book, which they've all been fantastic. And I've got it right here, by the way. I've absolutely love it. I can't recommend it enough for people to check it out, buy it, read it. It's incredible lessons. And, you don't overcomplicate it. I know you're a really smart guy, but you don't overcomplicate it, which I'm appreciative of. So thank you for that. What would you say is the biggest mistake you see leaders make when faced with adversity, when faced with a crisis? The biggest mistake they make?
I think they don't face it head on. The fact of the matter is, when you're in the middle of a crisis, you've got to face it honestly. If you made the mistake or your organization made the mistake, you don't try to, sidestep it. You don't try to shade the truth. What I see is a lot of times leaders, they try to parry the issue and, it really wasn't that bad, or no, it was somebody else's fault. And no, that's not what you do. What you do as a leader when you're in the crisis is you stand before your detractors, the public, the rank and file, whoever it is, and you say, you know what? We messed up. We could have done this better. I'm going to get it squared away, and I've got a plan for how we're going to move forward. And you take the slings and arrows, and you are as honest and as transparent as you can be. And when you go back and look at how great CEOs, great coaches, great people in their personal life have dealt with crisis, It's always by confronting it head on, being honest with yourself, being honest with the people that work for you. And then if you're honest with them, particularly if you're in a CEO setting, if you're honest with them, then the people that work for you, they can figure out how to solve some of these problems. If you mislead them and you're not upfront with them, then they don't know the problems they need to solve because you've just told them it's not a problem, Yeah. But if you let them know it's a problem and here's what the problem looks like, they can help you solve it.
Yeah. And doing it quickly matters too, doesn't it, sir? I mean, telling the truth, tell it fast, tell it yourself. I mean, that is a critical component, is being efficient about it, being quick about it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, again, the longer you delay, the worse it gets.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, I tell the story in there about when I first got to Iraq as the 3-star. I mean, the first night I'm in there, we have a civilian casualty, and it's pretty egregious. And, I mean, the guy wakes me up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I have to call General Petraeus and wake him up and tell him what has happened. And again, it was a pretty bad situation. General Petraeus was, needless to say, not happy about it. But he told me years later that he appreciated the fact that I got to him quickly. I told him all the ugliness of what had happened. And we were able to, in the middle of the night, make sure we got a hold of the ambassador and the prime minister in Iraq and let everybody know. So by the time the sun came up, we had a plan to how we were going to deal with this terrible tragedy.
Mm-hmm. When everything feels like it's falling apart, right? Whether it's a mission, what you've seen as a leader, and now so much in the business world, what is the first thing a leader should do when they start to see this is going off the rails? This is not working. I don't think the outcome is what we have prepared or planned for. What should they do?
Yeah, I talk about kind of the approach, at least that I take, whenever there's a crisis. And the first thing you have to do is you have to find out the nature of the crisis. And sometimes that's hard. People at the center of the crisis, it's not that they're bad people, but they only have a certain perspective. So the next thing you know, and again, this happened to me a lot in the military, I would get a call in the middle of the night and people would tell me, hey, sir, something went bad, but it's okay. It's not really all that bad. And then an hour later, something else comes out. And an hour later, something else comes out. And by the time, a couple hours gone by, you realize that it was really bad, but people didn't give you the honest assessment of what the crisis was. So the first thing a leader needs to do is they need to have, as we talk about in the military, this kind of CCIRs, the Commander's Critical Information Requirements. So you need to know, what is it that I need to know as a leader to make an assessment of how bad this crisis is? Once you know that, then you're in a much better position to deal with it. If you don't know, if you haven't created a culture where people will come tell you the truth, then you're going to find yourself dealing with the one arm tied behind your back. So you create a culture in your organization that says, you know what, bring bad news to me, bring it to me quickly, bring it to me with all the information you have, recognizing that, we won't have it all right the first go around, but give me everything, and then I can begin to solve the problem. And so, the first thing leaders need to do is they need to ask, as you asked earlier, when you're talking to young enlisted guys, if you're going to get them to talk to you, you need to ask the hard questions. Tell me what's happening on the ground. How bad is this? What does the press look like? Do we have anybody injured? You go on and on and on. But I have a checklist, and most people in the military do. So an incident happens, you're going to go through, say, any lost lives, U.S. lost lives. How about our allies? How about, civilian casualties? And if you're in the university setting, it's the same questions to some degree. Has any student been hurt? Any buildings been damaged? Tell me what's going on. So you have to ask the questions to get the answers you're looking for. And a lot of times leaders just fail to do that because they don't have a structure in place already.
Yeah, I love it. When you're leading a team through uncertainty or change, which is something, I know as a speaker too, I speak about 70 days a year at companies as well. And I know you do a ton of speaking also. And the one thing that is constant on every prep call before every keynote with every leadership team is change, uncertainty. Lots of this is happening, and it seems to be the new, currency. I would argue that adaptability is a critical currency today. How do you as a leader keep people motivated, keep them committed, locked in on the mission inside of what is sort of this consistent change and a zigzag line, but we got to keep them locked in and committed and motivated.
Yeah, and part of it is making sure you understand what your mission is. So if your mission is teaching students and taking care of students, then you make sure that the faculty, that the people that are supporting you understand what the mission is. If you're in the military and the mission is protecting American lives, you understand that. So you have to have the mission well defined and realize that outside the lines of this mission, things are going to swirl, right? There's going to be press, there's going to be changing environments. Your job is to make sure people stay focused on the mission. And by ensuring that you have given them a clear mission, that's going to help. But the other thing to do is, you as a leader, you've always got to look confident. If you've been punched in the gut because something has changed dramatically, or if you've had a bad mission, or things have gone wrong on campus, or in the corporate world, you've got a big crisis, as a leader, you better step before the rank and file, shoulders back, head up, eyes clear. You look them in the eye and you say, you know what, we just got punched in the gut, but I tell you what, I got a plan. Here's what we're going to do. And sometimes you got to fake it until you can make it, But the last thing you want to do as a leader is walk before the men and women that work for you with your shoulders down, your head down. You go, oh my God, this is terrible. Something has changed. No, change, as you point out, Molly, change is a part of life. So, Hey, things have changed, but guess what? Our mission is this. Things have changed, but our mission is this. Things can change outside the boundaries, but we have to stay focused on the mission. And I'll take care of the change. And that's, again, something that the leader has to do. You men and women, you stay focused on the task. I will take care of everything that's swirling outside that.
And as inside of organizations, obviously, sometimes that change is involved in them physically changing where they do their work, the kind of work they're doing. And so getting them excited and believing in the mission is critical, isn't it? And sometimes that can be hard. How do you coach leaders to, sell the belief of the shift and their role in it as a teammate of that leaders?
Yeah, that's I think that is, again, one of the strengths of the great leaders is that they know how to motivate people by connecting the dots. So I'll give you a case in point. I had an opportunity to talk to a large telecommunications event several years ago. And I was told before I went to talk to these folks that they were a little down, that things weren't going well, and what could I do to inspire them or motivate them? And I was a little perplexed. And I said, well, okay, so tell me what these people that I'm going to talk to, what do they do? Well, they're the people that string the telephone lines, and they do this, and they put up the power, and okay. That's not what they do. And the guy said, no, sir, we got the people that hang the power lines. I said, you're missing the point. So I stood before the people, and I asked them, there were about 200 in the audience, I said, what do y'all do here? What does this company do? And the guy said, well, sir, I string the lines here, and the other one says, well, I operate this. And I said, no, that's not what you do. You connect people. You connect me to my daughter and me to my sons. You connect mothers and daughters and fathers and sons. You connect people. That may be the single most important thing in the world, is to connect people. Don't ever forget that your role, no matter where you think you are in the pecking order, the mission of this organization is to connect people, to make human relations work. And for some reason, they hadn't viewed it like that before, surprisingly. They viewed their jobs as, it's like the person that works in the mailroom. Right. Let me tell you, the people that work in the mailroom, the housekeeping staff, you pick somebody, they're incredibly important to everything working. But if you don't explain to them how important they are in the big scheme of things, then they don't understand. We used to talk about overseas that your proximity to the target had nothing to do with your value to the mission. So sometimes guys always thought that, hey, if I'm not the SEAL or the Army Special Forces guy kicking down the walls, getting the bad guys, then I'm obviously not important. You say, really? Because you're flying the drone that gave me the information on where that bad guy was. You're the intelligence specialist that's telling me where the enemy is. You're the medevac pilot that's going to pick up my wounded. Your proximity had nothing to do with your value. So you have to understand as a leader, how do you relate to the men and women that are, that are working for you, what their role really means, what the whole mission is, and why their role is important.
It's amazing. I'm sure have heard the parable with the cathedral bricklayer, which is similar, right? Like, what do you do? Right. I mean, but it's so true. And I think I did an event for a large payment company and similar deal, right? You are the people that are the conduit to which people put food on their table to feed their families. I mean, that level of connection is so critical for us as a leader to ensure that the people that we lead feel a part of more deeply than sometimes they would at the surface. Some of the points in your book, one of the ones that I thought was particularly interesting as someone who negotiated a lot, I thought this was kind of a cool one, which is don't rush to failure, right? You talk about in chapter 7, don't rush to failure. Like, and I always say in negotiation, don't rush to a no necessarily. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, it's a difficult balance, when you're in the middle of a crisis. You asked me earlier, yes, you have to move quickly in a crisis. Again, you got to do the assessment first. You got to kind of understand the nature of it, but you've got to move to contain the crisis quickly, right? But it is this very difficult balance that sometimes it's only through experience that you understand the nature of the balance. But you don't want to rush so fast that you miss the fundamentals. And so, again, from a coaching perspective, you've been coached before, you understand this. The coaches will also always talk about, the fundamentals of basketball, football, baseball. If you don't get the fundamentals right, then you're probably not going to execute well on game day. Well, it's the same thing about rushing to failure. Sometimes people forget the fundamentals in an effort to get to the target fast, to get to, whatever they're trying to do quickly. And you say, look, you got to be very careful. If you forget step 1, 2, and 3 because you want to jump to step 4 because you understand that's what's got to be done first, then you may find that you have rushed to failure and things aren't going to work well. So you have to understand where you can, move things quicker. And I always talk about, look, everybody understands there's a process. The people that have experience know where you can shortchange the process and not have the whole Jenga tower fall down, right?
Right.
So it is important to understand the steps, and if you have to, you got to know where to pull the steps out so you can get from point A to point D quicker. But be careful about missing the fundamentals as you're trying to solve the problem. That is kind of rushing to failure.
What is your advice on how to lead when you don't have all the answers, but you need to make a decision? And you this is obviously critical to your latest book, but how do you advise people, leaders, business people, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, you never have all the answers. So, that's the first thing you have to understand. No matter how much assessment you do, you're never going to have all the answers. So once again, leadership is as much an art as it is a science.
Right.
And, I can give them the graph and talk about, yes, assess, report, contain, shape, manage. We can talk about a lot of these things, but so much of this is just your experience. So for me, and I'm not in the book, but when I first got to Iraq as a 1-star, I show up in the middle of the night. I turn over with the officer that's there. This is 2003. And that night, the Army soft guy and the helicopter guy come to me and they said, hey, sir, we got a mission, pretty straightforward mission. We're going to fly out. The bad guys are out in Ramadi. Doesn't look like it's going to be a problem. We're going to take 2 Black Hawk helicopters, got a bunch of Rangers. It'll all be fine. I said, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, now I'm new, my first time kind of in this position. And I thought, okay, I got it. Well, about half an hour later, they came back and they said, oh my God, sir, everything's changed. More bad guys. Now we need 5 helicopters, going to need more range. Whoa. Stop. So we were in a big briefing room at the time, and I took the 2 senior officers, 2 lieutenant colonels. I said, hey, come back in my office here. And I sat them down and I said, look me in the eye and tell me you can do this. Because if you hesitate at all, I'm not going to do it. But if you tell me you can do it, I will trust you to do the mission. And they said to me, hey, sir, we can do this. So we went and did the mission. I was a little anxious. The mission went off well. But the lesson to me was, and the lesson to all, leaders at whatever level, whether you're running a local Starbucks or a Burger King, or whether you're CEO of a Fortune 500 company, there's somebody in your company, somebody at your Starbucks, somebody in your who has probably been through this before. Draw on the people around you to help you get the answers. Because once again, what I saw a lot in my time in Iraq and Afghanistan was I never had perfect information. Frankly, I generally had about 50, maybe I was lucky 60%. Now, my experience helped over time. But when I had to close that gap, I would say, okay, we're going to target a guy that's moving at 40 miles an hour along a desert road. I've got an airplane overhead. I've got a drone overhead. I've got, guys on ships. I got a general idea how to do this. Who's done this before? By this time, 4 or 5 hands come up and they go, oh, sir, hey, I did this mission against this bad. You draw on them to close that information gap. Once again, you never get it all, but you can close the gap, and then you have to rely on the men and women that are working for you to do their job, and they'll help you get through whatever's left of that gap.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to ask you a couple more quick questions, and then we'll hit rapid fire. But I have been to the Coronado Hotel. I've spoken there a ton. One day I ran out. I thought, I'm going to take a run down the beach. I take a left. I'm running down the beach, and I'm just running. I got my AirPods in. I'm crushing it. And all of a sudden, I get swarmed. Like, I'm going to do what, because I had crossed the line to where all you studs are. But one of the things that strikes me about SEAL training and BUDS is the bell, and how it's intentionally easy to access the bell and quit.
Right.
What, in your experience, is the difference between the guys who ring the bell and the guys that don't? And because to me it is so mental, as I've heard you talk about. You got 5'4" guys, right? You got skinny guys, you got 6'2" guys like you. What's the mindset of the guys that don't ring the bell? What's the difference?
Yeah, a couple of years ago when I was here at the university as the chancellor, I had one of the young athletes on the track team. He was a nationally ranked decathlete, and he was going to go to SEAL training. And so he wanted to meet me for lunch, and so we go to the local club. And again, this kid is like 6'3", shoulders like this, got about a 32-inch waist. And we're talking, and he finally, of course, gets up the courage to kind of ask the question he's been wanting to ask, which is, how do I make it through SEAL training? And he said, sir, I kind of want to understand, how to get through SEAL training. I don't say anything. And he says, well, should I do more push-ups? I said, no. He's a nationally ranked decathlete.
Right.
He said,
right.
Should I do more swimming? No. Should I do more running? No. More pull-ups? No. And he kind of and I could tell he's getting frustrated. And finally, he kind of gets a little exasperated. And I said, look, there's only one thing you have to do. Don't quit. And he says, no, I understand that. I said, no, I don't think you do. I said, you're going to have 1,000 opportunities to quit. 1,000 opportunities to quit. It's going to be cold one day. You're going to be tired. You're going to have the flu. Your boat crew all quits on you. You're going to have 1,000 opportunities to quit. And the only thing that separates all the SEALs from everybody else is that we didn't quit. And it's hard to know why somebody is motivated. We've been looking at trainees for the last 60 some odd years. And we've got psychological tests. We've got all that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of what's in your heart. Are you committed to getting through training? And for me, I went through in 1977 before there were any movies and books. I knew nothing about SEAL training. I assumed that they were going to try to kill me going through. And sometimes as a trainee, you think they are. It's only later you realize how orchestrated it is. So I was absolutely committed to getting through. And the guys that do get through come in, they don't want to just be SEALs so they can impress the girls and wear the trident. They understand that this is a lifelong opportunity for them if they do it right. And it is, again, it is a remarkable fraternity of great warriors. We're not all perfect. We make mistakes. We've got knuckleheads in the SEAL teams just like everywhere else. But on par, I'd stand my guys up against anybody else in the world. They're great warriors, great human beings, great fathers, great sons, great husbands. And, it was just an honor to spend 37 years with them. If I could have spent another 37, I would have.
Well, it is, to me, it is absolutely unbelievable. The mental toughness that is inside of guys like you that get through that. And I'm almost hearing you say it's just a decision.
It is.
That I'm not quitting.
Right.
It's just they've made a decision, and so it's not even in play.
And that's a great point. It's got to be taken out of play, because if it's in the back of your mind, the instructors will figure out a way to bring that to the forefront. Because there are going to be days when you are freezing, when you are exhausted, when you're getting yelled at by professional harassers. And if it is in your mind somewhere that you were thinking about quitting, then it'll come to the forefront. But you have to go into training and say, I don't care what happens, I'm not quitting. And those are the guys that generally make it through. The other thing I would offer, though, is, I was 22 years old when I went through. It helps to be young, too.
Well, good point. But wow, I'm curious. You married your wife now for. You've been married a long time. You were married in 1978. You have 3, grown children. And this is a question, candidly, Admiral, I get a lot, and I would imagine you get it now even too in the world we have today. How did you navigate what is an absolutely excruciatingly demanding public role and do such a remarkable job keeping your personal and family intact? Candidly, it is fantastic. When I read that, I was very excited to see that. It's always so rewarding when you see people who have achieved a lot without compromising what I would argue actually matters the most, your family.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, for one, I was fortunate to marry the right woman. She is stronger, smarter, more resilient. She raised the kids during my deployments. It is, any success we have had with the kids and the family are frankly all hers. And so, part of it is sometimes you just have to be lucky. But I am also, I've often been asked, how do you do this work-life balance? And whenever she was in the office, somebody would ask me this question, I could see her wince like, oh, please don't give your standard answer. And my standard answer used to be, there is no work-life balance. If you want to be great at what you do, you're going to have to sacrifice something. And, it just means you're going to have to come in early, you're going to have to work hard, stay late, come in on the weekends. This is what is required if you're going to be great at anything. But a couple of years ago, I'm on the National Football Foundation, and I was out at Stanford at an event, and the speaker before me got up and changed my whole mindset on something I wish I had known when I was, 21 years old when we got married. But he said, look, life is like, juggling balls. You got a lot of balls in the air. He said, some of those balls are rubber balls. And if you drop them, they're going to bounce back up. If you miss your kid's soccer game, there's going to be another soccer game. If you miss, something here, there's probably going to be another one of those. But some of those balls are crystal balls. And if you drop the crystal balls, you break them. And you can't pick those pieces back up. And what's important is to know the difference between the rubber balls and the crystal balls. Well, I didn't always get it right. I missed a lot of anniversaries. I missed a lot of birthdays. I missed the birth of my daughter. My son was born. I left a week later. And so, again, when I look back on our 46 years, soon to be 47 here in a week, all the credit goes to her.
Wow. I've heard that metaphor, and I love that metaphor because I think it is about sort of alignment and recognizing what are, in fact, the things that are crystal balls, if you will, and rubber balls. Admiral, I'm going to hit you with a couple rapid fire, and then I know you've got, you've probably got, the president or somebody on hold. No, I'm kidding. What is your morning routine?
Nowadays, my morning, there is no routine anymore. So I'm on the road about 4 or 5 days a week, so it depends on what the day is. But if there is a normal day, I mean, I get up. Yes, in fact, I do make my bed. I normally kind of have my cup of coffee before I make my bed, but I will make my bed within probably an hour of being up. And then, I kind of start hitting the emails. Again, depending upon what the day looks like. I have an office downtown in Austin, so sometimes I'm down there or I'm on the road. I try to work out, 3 or 4, if I'm lucky, 4 or 5 days a week. It is hard to get into a routine, but I think I'm okay with that. I've got one of my great idols is Admiral Bobby Inman. Admiral Inman is now 94 years old. We just had an event for him last week. He had been the Director of Naval Intelligence, the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, Deputy Director of CIA. He came here to Austin many years ago and really transformed it. But 10 years ago, when he was 84 years old, I asked him, how do you do it? I mean, he is sharp as a tack. And he says, I get up every morning with something to do. And so that's the way I hope to live the rest of my life, is to get up every morning. You got to be a little anxious. You're going to do something that's going to get your blood pumping a little bit, and that's good. I think that's what keeps you young.
Yeah, you bet. What's one book every leader should read?
Every leader should read. Well, Once an Eagle is always a good one, by Anton Meyer. I mean, that's kind of the standard standard book that most Army guys do, and it's good because it talks about the contrasting nature of leadership. But I also like, interestingly enough, All Quiet on the Western Front. Short book. And the reason it was important to me is it's a book about a German soldier on the Western Front during World War I. And as a military officer, what you learn very quickly is soldiers are all alike. And when I look at it, you see what the German soldier is going through, how he views war. And I realize that could be me, it could be anybody else in the world, and understanding the leadership that it takes to get somebody through difficult times, that's a great book as well. So those are 2 great books.
Those are awesome. What's one ritual that is a part of your life that's really been a game changer for you?
Well, I mean, it's the ritual of working out. Life is... I tell folks, look, life's it's not that hard. Make as many friends as you can, work as hard as you can. But it sounds simple. You got to eat right, you got to get good rest, and you got to work out. Come on. Those 3 things. This is not rocket science. Yeah. But when I miss my workout, when I can't get in the gym, my gym back over there, when I can't get in my gym, I get a little cranky. I do find that working out, and if I can get on the basketball court, I try to get out there as often as I can. But my ritual is working out. It's a thing that kind of clears my head and keeps me sane.
Yeah. That's awesome. I hear you. So who or what is a game changer? The show's called Game Changers. Who or what is a game changer, dead or alive, who inspires you and why?
Yeah, it's not just one person. When this is going to sound a little trite, but I mean every word of it, is, when you're in combat and you see the young enlisted men and women that are serving overseas, and you realize that they are sergeants or corporals, they're married with a couple of kids, they're overseas in Iraq or Afghanistan, they're there for a year. The wife is back home or the husband's back home taking care of the family. Their sense of duty and sacrifice, I saw it before 9/11, but episodically. But after 9/11, I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you see it every day. And so to me, the game-changing nature of it is that anytime you feel a little bit worried about the state of the country, let me tell you, I've spent a lot of time with the millennials and the Gen Z. This is a great generation. They are just as hardworking, just as patriotic, just as heroic as their parents and grandparents before them. And as an old guy, for me, it was a game changer because they inspired me every single day. And now I teach a graduate class at the LBJ school at UT, same young men and women, and they continue to inspire me. It is a game changer for me because, at some point in time I thought, well, how am I going to get inspired? Well, let me tell you, this generation inspires me. It keeps me going.
Amen. That is awesome. Admiral McRaven, you are a game changer. No question about it. I admire you. I'm grateful for you, as are so many others. Thank you so much.